Okay, so we had chapter 7, pages 185 to 188. So, Candace Jones. Candace Jones is many things. She is a black deaf woman, a news anchor for Sign One News, an educator, an ASL poet, and a motivational speaker. Candace Jones delivers local, regional, and national news for Sign One News, along with providing information in ASL online. Candace worked with Accessible Material Projects in bringing accessibility through English to ASL translation. She provided consultant support for the Research and Development Center on Literacy and Deafness at Georgia State University. Next, we have Carla Garcia Fernandez. Carla is from New Mexico, proudly, and is currently an assistant professor at California State University, Northridge, teaching deaf studies. Carla has many different research interests, including intersectionality, social justice, particularly in education, critical race studies, deaf Hispanics and Latinx critical studies, and ethnic studies. In Carla's free time, she values spending time with family, unearthing the roots of her family tree, and she truly enjoys the outdoors as a way to stay spiritually connected to Mother Nature. Next, we have Armando Castro Osnaya, and more. Armando is a deaf Mexican who is a professor at many different colleges, teaching Lenguas de Señas Mexicana and ASL, one of the co-authors who helped develop the hybrid LSM course at Gallaudet. Armando travels throughout the United States and Mexico to teach LSM and to educate about Mexico's deaf communities and cultures, as well as LSM and 5 indigenous sign languages used in Mexico. After they talked about Armando, this section added more, which they mentioned how that there's not enough space in this chapter to talk about everyone, and that there are so many more deaf people who influence people in the deaf community. And then it also had some questions to think about. So those included, how often do you read about different deaf communities or deaf cultures? How often do you read about different deaf languages and culture? And then this was more of a fact. They said, did you know that there are 14 black deaf people who have a PhD in the United States? That's a fun fact that they had.
Hi, my name is Lizzie Kleiss, and today I will be doing the second part of our presentation, starting on page 185. The first part of the book that I read talked about Francis Awana. He was a black, deaf, disabled man who came to the United States on a student visa for education. He went to the Michigan School for the Deaf in Flint. At the time period that he was there, Flint, Michigan was having a water crisis because of the lead pipes. And that has been continuing to go on since 2014. The problem that they were having is they decided to change the water source, and instead of getting water from the Flint River, they decided to get it from, I believe it was maybe Detroit. And then the pipes that they had were all lead and really old, which was okay because they had built up a mineral deposit, and so the water wasn't actually directly touching the lead pipes, and it was totally safe to drink. But when they changed the water source to the Detroit water source, I believe it was, they ended up getting a different pH of the water, and it ate away at all of the mineral buildup, which was the protection against the lead. And so then the water was directly touching the lead pipes, and it contaminated the drinking water and made it unsafe. So there's still lead in the water source, and it's not enough for the federal government to step in, but it is enough to be detrimental to the health of the community. And this is still a problem that is ongoing. There are tons of houses that are just completely abandoned because people can't afford water to drink there, because you literally have to go to the store and get it, or you have to get super expensive filtration systems. So that was something that was happening in Flint, Michigan at the time that Francis was there. He spent 34 years in the United States until he was detained by international Immigrant and Customs Enforcement. ICE stands for Immigrant and Customs Enforcement. And he was detained by them. In 2018, he faced deportation back to, I believe it was Nigeria. However, I don't know if he was deported or not. I tried to research it, and I really couldn't find whether that happened or not. It was back in 2018. There was like 1 or 2 news stories on it, nothing else. But if he was deported, unfortunately, people were saying that it is essentially a death sentence because he does not have access to proper communication methods there, and because of his other disabilities, he is disabled, he would not be able to find any medical or mental care there that he needs. He was in and out of group homes a lot in the United States, and that's why he ended up losing some of the documentation that he would have needed to stay here. And that's why he faced deportation in the first place. So I hope that he wasn't deported. I really don't know though. The second person that they talked about was a deaf Latino man who has lived in the United States since he was a baby. But now he is the father of a deaf baby girl, and the Immigrants and Customs Enforcement detained him at 24 years old. He was detained with no access to communication, no sign language, no interpreters, absolutely nothing, and he was apart from his family for 4 months. After public demand, he was finally released. And there's a picture of him and his daughter. The next portion was talking about minorities, COVID-19, and the Trump administration. COVID-19 made it extremely difficult for deafblind communities to live as they no longer had access to proper interpreters or even entertainment options such as Netflix transcripts, as they were really hard to find. The isolation was extreme for these individuals, and it made it really difficult for them to continue to do what they needed to do. The second part that they talked about was Trump's actions, such as calling COVID-19 the China virus, which is not only inaccurate, but it increased discrimination of Asian communities, and racism and xenophobia did increase within the U.S. He also announced that the Affordable Care Act would no longer cover transgender individuals, which was devastating to the LGBTQIA communities. He, in addition, cut funding for AIDS and HIV research, which is really just unfortunate because so many people in the deaf community also are a part of these other communities, and maybe they're Asian or Black, or they are part of the LGBTQ community, and so these intersectionalities of all of the things that they are facing is really tricky and unfortunate. The next part, it wanted to define intersectionality. Steinmetz had a long quote about what intersectionality is and isn't. I summarized it by saying, a lens for seeing the way that various forms of inequality exacerbate each other, and it includes inequality based on race, sexuality, gender, or class, which are usually experienced in tandem with each other. The book acknowledged that it has bias, and it is written from a white perspective. So there are various experiences and stories written by and stories written by just one person only show a piece of the entire picture. Overall, intersectionality was designed by Black women for Black women, and so while a lot of people do experience intersectionality, it is a concept originally designed for and by Black women, which means that if there is a deaf white woman, for example, I think it talked about there being a deaf white woman, she may experience sexism and autism because she's a woman and she's deaf, but she doesn't experience like racism. And so because she is white, she does have that privilege, and so intersectionality would not necessarily apply to her case. And I thought that was really interesting as well. So that was the rest of the part that I read. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.